In the United States, leaving no tip at a restaurant is considered rude, sometimes even aggressive. In South Korea, leaving a tip can be considered offensive. Same act, opposite meaning. That single cultural gap points to something much deeper than table manners. South Korea runs one of the most efficient service economies in the developed world, and it does it entirely without gratuity. So the question worth asking is this: if tipping is supposed to improve service, why does one of the world's most service-oriented countries refuse to use it at all? The scale of the tipping economy in America is significant. According to the Pew Research Center, about 92% of Americans tip at sit-down restaurants, with the average gratuity hovering between 18 and 20% of the bill. The federal minimum wage for tipped workers in the United States is just $2.13 per hour, a figure that has not changed since 1991, as reported by the U.S. Department of Labor. Employers are legally permitted to pay that rate on the assumption that tips will close the gap. In South Korea, by contrast, the national minimum wage set by the Minimum Wage Commission applies uniformly to all workers, including those in food service. In 2024, it stood at 9,860 Korean won per hour, roughly $7.50. There are no carve-outs for service staff. South Korea also ranked among the top 5 countries globally for restaurant density per capita, according to Euromonitor International, meaning competition in the service sector is fierce without gratuity acting as any kind of motivator. Tipping in America has a complicated history that most diners never consider. Historians including Saru Jayaraman, director of Food Labor Research Center at UC Berkeley, have documented how the tip minimum wage originated in the post-Civil War era, when restaurant and railroad industries lobbied to exempt formerly enslaved black workers from standard wage protections, substituting patron generosity for employer responsibility. The practice became structurally embedded, and it never left. Korea, rebuilding its economy rapidly after the Korean War in the 1950s, structured its labor laws differently from the start. Wages were set by government negotiation, not left to customer discretion. The cultural context matters too. Confucian principles embedded in Korean workplace culture treat service as a professional role deserving inherent dignity, not something that must be earned tip by tip in front of a customer. Publicly handing someone money for good behavior carries an implicit hierarchy that, in Korean social norms, can read as condescending rather than generous. The no-tipping norm was never a policy decision. It was a cultural default that labor law then reinforced. Neither system is without its problems. In the United States, the Economic Policy Institute has documented that tipped workers experience poverty rates roughly twice as high as non-tipped workers, partly because income is variable and partly because wage theft among tipped employees is widespread. Tips also correlate with race and gender in ways that have nothing to do with service quality, a pattern documented repeatedly in Cornell University hospitality research. Korea's model is not painless either. Higher fixed labor costs have accelerated the adoption of self-ordering kiosks and tableside tablets. The Korea Employers Federation has noted sustained pressure on small restaurant owners as minimum wage increases have outpaced revenue growth for some operators. There is also a tension between the dignity the system promises workers and the reality of grueling hours in a hyper-competitive market. The question is not which system is perfect. The question is where the risk lands, on the worker or on the business owner. What Korea's no-tipping culture actually reveals is that tipping is not a natural feature of service economies. It is a structural choice, and like all structural choices, it distributes costs somewhere. America chose to distribute the cost of paying service workers onto the customer, making it voluntary and therefore unequal. Korea chose to distribute it onto the employer through mandated wages, making it predictable and therefore consistent. Several countries, including Australia, Japan, and much of Northern Europe, have arrived at similar conclusions through different paths. The real lesson is not that one culture is more polite than the other. It is that the rules around service and money are always designed by someone, and the design always reflects whose comfort and whose stability the system was built to protect. That is a pattern worth recognizing wherever you live.